Seven Blue Skies Channel presents Paranormal, Book 4, Part 3, Legend of the Cannibal, by Dr. Ahmed Khalid Tawfiq. Cairo, February 12, 1965. Dear Professor Catherell, I was lucky to receive your letter, respectable colleague, the continuous guardian of the gates of science and the nightmare for ignorance. I write to you this letter with good news. I have found our precious prey, and it wasn't an easy job at all. You had told me that our friend's name is Wehdet or Hemmet, in other words, a name of the type that has been altered by the Turks, changing the final H to a T, which happens a lot in our language, for example, Sarwat, Talat, etc. Actually, we use the name Mervet in Arabic, not knowing it's actually the name Marwa destroyed by the Turks. But let's leave off from this linguistic talk and go back to our topic. You told me that his name was Hemmet or Wehdet, and Hemmet is not really used in Egypt except as a girl's name. As for Wehdet, it is used by the Turks only and never really used by Egyptians. Therefore, I asked the building's doorman, after giving him £1 and a cigarette, about someone linked to such a name, Sarwat, Talat, or Rafat. He told me there is a suspicious man on the 4th floor named Rifat Ismail, that he lives alone and has no friends, that he spends every afternoon alone in his apartment, and that he claims to be a professor in medical school. But I don't know of his clinic and have never even heard of him, despite his working in the same university affiliated with both of our faculties. Stranger still is that the doorman told me that a few days ago he had found strange white bones thrown down the ventilation shaft, and that when he asked this Rifat if he had thrown them, he seemed confused and surprised, and even gave him 25p to bring these bones to his apartment, and he put 10 lines under this sentence. As for his neighbor, who is a teacher and a family man, he stated he has a lot of doubts about this suspicious guy, has never seen family visiting him, that he has a habit of banging on the floor at night for unknown reasons, and that he travels abroad a lot. Also, they told me, the doorman and the neighbor, that he is ugly and scary looking overall, and his age is approximately 40, which means he is in the same age range as our man. I will try to visit him and get to know him, but my job will not be easy. I mean, you don't visit a cannibal every day. And I will not take a step before I receive your reply. Sincerely, Dr. Mohammed Shaheen. Detroit, March 2nd, 1965. Dear colleague, I think you are right about your suspicions. And please excuse me for mistaking the name, because these Arabic and Turkish names all sound similar to our Western ears. Before visiting that man, I want you to take all precautions by carrying a weapon, or a knife, and to leave your address and info with one of your friends so that if you are more than 3 hours late, they would call the police. As for my advice, it is as follows. A. I don't know what entrance you can use to get close to him, and I think you're the only one to know this because you, like him, are an Egyptian and know what should and should not be said. B. If you enter his home, try to look for evidence of primitive cultural art. There must be some traces of this because it can be found in the homes of all cannibals discovered to date. C. Try to discern the type of food he eats and bring any sample of it to analyze. D. Take note of the way he speaks, for if my judgment doesn't betray me, you will find he has some kind of deficiency in certain letters, which is quite common in cannibals because their tongues gradually become mutilated due to processing hard tissues, which leads to a change in their pronunciation. Once again, be careful. Sincerely, Professor Dr. R.L. Catherell. 5. The Intrusive. Cairo, March 17, 1965. Dear Adel, yesterday I finally received the telephone for my apartment, but the line hasn't been connected yet. It was a stormy day, and I was bombarded with problems. I had cut my chin while shaving. I burned my tongue drinking my still hot coffee and practically can't speak now. And then, the biggest one of all, I broke off the key to the closet door in the lock and had to break the door itself to find a clean shirt. And then I decided to organize the contents therein, including souvenirs which I will never forget. The werewolf's claw Ekaterina wore, a broken bottle of acid left over from my ominous trip to Scotland. You don't know that story. And the Zulu tribe's magical statue which was gifted to me by Dr. Amgulu in Nigeria years ago. I found it quite beautiful and deserving of being displayed in my living room. Then I wore my kitchen apron and cooked some beans and rice with a delicious veal shank I had bought from an honest butcher. I prepped the table and everything and sat drooling, devouring this meal. Me, who had almost forgotten the taste of home cooking, especially as I only cook maybe twice a month. I always feel remorse and waste of effort for the hours I spend cooking when the eating ends in minutes. All this hardship for just 10 minutes of pleasure. I don't think there is a good reason for that, and I don't think my stomach deserves all this exaggerated fuss. And here the doorbell rang. While chewing a spoonful of rice, which I then swallowed, I went angrily to open the door. This cursed door which only ever brings me people asking for money, blaming me for something, conveying a disaster, or borrowing something they will never return. I opened the door and found a despicable bald man wearing telescopic lenses, very thick glasses, and an overly colorful suit. With a slimy smile, he asked, "Dr. Rifat Ismail?" "What do you want?" While looking at me curiously, he said, "I'm Dr. Mohammed Shaheen, professor of anthropology in the University of... Would you allow me to come in?" I showed him into the living room and sat him on a comfortable chair, which he dove into while sneaking rude looks at the corners of my living room and its furniture. His eyes then froze while regarding the Zulu statue I had placed on the buffet, as I mentioned to you earlier. A look of victory and viciousness shone in his eyes. He then looked at me and said, "This is a Zulu tribe statue, which depicts the old cannibalism rituals." As I was shaking my head, meaning I didn't really know, he said, "I'm aware of such things through my work." And with a twisted tongue from the burnt coffee, I told him that I preferred he explained the secret of his honoring me with this visit, as I was busy eating. In an insistent, begging manner, he replied, "If you insist," and I continued eating in front of him as he explained the purpose of his visit. "Would you like to eat with me?" He swallowed hard, and it seemed to me like he was about to pass out. But he apologized, saying he had already eaten before coming, and thus we sat at the table and I put the delicious veal shank on my plate and started cutting it with a knife and fork in front of his frightened, silent gaze. I didn't know why. He was shaking while shrinking in his chair. I then grabbed the bone and hid it on the edge of the plate to empty it of the marrow, as is my childhood habit, licking my lips with pleasure. And here I heard him gasping and saw him covering his mouth with his hand and pointing at me in a way I understood instantly. "Ah, the bathroom? Come quickly, right this way." He ran to the bathroom, and I closed the door on him and the sound of his vomiting. With disgust, I asked myself the reason behind all these people coming to puke at my place. I don't think my looks are that hideous. When he returned, he looked better and apologized warmly to me for having done that. "Sorry, it's a conditional reflex." "Oh yes, I know of this," I said, to which he replied while breathing heavily, "Yes, that's it." He then started telling me a stupid story with no beginning or ending, something about his cousin whose plane had crashed in the western desert, that he had been searching for him for years, had been told he lived in this building, and thought I may know something about the topic. I told him I had no idea about his missing cousin, but he kept speaking insistently about primitive tribes, cannibalism, the Zulu civilization, and... I asked him to leave, but he insisted on giving me a headache. And when he found there was no use in his persistence, he politely asked me to give him the bone I was eating, for some unknown purpose. Am I never going to finish with these crazies all my life? Losing all control over my nerves, I rounded on him and said, "Okay, you want the bone for some reason? Maybe for soup?" And I lifted the bone in my fist like a small club and moved toward him slowly, conjuring the most evil look I could on my face. He turned yellow and green in the face and jumped like a mouse out of his chair and then retreated towards the door, saying, "You won't hurt me. You can't hurt me with this bone. Ramsey knows where I am. I told him." "And who is Ramsey, anyway?" I asked. "He's my neighbor, and he knows, and Badri knows, and my wife knows. The whole city knows. You wouldn't dare." Opening my apartment door and throwing him out like so much garbage, I said, "Well, we'll see," and I slammed the door behind him, still hearing his muffled protests and threats. He screamed, "Yeah, we will see, you butcher, you cannibal." And that's how my depressing day ended. And now I only have the usual news to tell you. Nothing weird after my last letter except for some more knocking above Mr. Zachariah's apartment and more mysterious train tickets to and from Alexandria. Nothing else. You mentioned in your last letter that Azid is the owner of the fingerprints on the bones. What does that mean? And what do you think? I don't think he kills people in his apartment and throws their bodies in the ventilation shaft. That is a bit exaggerated. Write to me in detail. Your brother, Rifat. Alexandria, March 24th, 1965. Brother Rifat, I cracked up so much while reading your story about this crazy scientist in your apartment. These things only happen to you. And if you hadn't told me he called you by name, I would have thought he was looking for someone else, like your weirdo neighbor, who is also interested in bones like him. And I wonder. Anyway, you have no escape here. I have arranged everything for your stay at my place in Alexandria for a week or two because, honestly, I'm not reassured by your staying alone in the midst of all these question marks, which you know quite well. I'm also not reassured about the stability of your nerves and mind after all this. First, you must take a long vacation from the medical school. You will meet me here on April 5th, and I have given you this appointment so that you can't find any chance to back out or to repeat the same excuses. Sincerely, Adil. Cairo, March 17, 1965. Dear Professor Cathrell, I have visited him, and have no doubt he is our man. You had told me to listen for a weird accent, and he was speaking from the side of his mouth in a very strange way, as if his tongue was burnt. And you had told me to look for any primitive cultural stuff, and there was a Zulu statue depicting cannibalism rituals, and he was proud of it. And you had told me to observe his food. He was eating a baby's thigh with rice and beans. And when I cornered him with my educated questions, he turned into the devil with fire and evil coming from his eyes. He jumped on me, waving the child's bone, meaning to crush my skull, but I miraculously escaped. I'm still shaking just thinking about all this. And now, what do I do with this cannibal? Should I call the cops, or do you have another more complete scientific goal outside of my humble knowledge? Sincerely, Dr. Mohammed Shaheen. Detroit, May 4th, 1965. My dear colleague, Dr. Shaheen, of course I have a more complete purpose. You have managed to prove my killer theory that cannibalism is an instinct in the human soul, and that the tasting of human flesh has destroyed centuries of civilized legacy within the soul of this man. And now, like primitives, he takes no pleasure in any meat except humans. And I don't think you have a real problem in Cairo, but I have a decent plan to stop this monster without destroying him or preventing us from studying him as a unique specimen, and I will tell you how. 6. Bride of the Mediterranean. Alexandria, April 6, 1965. My dear brother Rida, very few times have I ever written a letter to you, maybe because you are always close to my heart, and a letter implies that the recipient is far away. How are you, brother, my dear close and far one? And how is Mom, our sister, and your wife and kids? And how is Talat, our brother-in-law? And what's going on with the problem with the land? I haven't seen any of you since my return from Scotland, for 9 full months. Do I mean nothing to you to this extent? Only yesterday I arrived in Alexandria to spend some days, for a change of atmosphere, with a friend whose invitation I could not refuse. He's a sergeant in the Alexandrian Police Headquarters. It's Adil Tawfiq. Do you remember him? Anyway, we relived unforgettable moments in our walks on the Corniche. Alex in winter has its own charms, and understood only by people like me who hate traffic. The sea air, the lights of the restaurants and casinos. The past is magic still alive, and it has caught up with the elegance of the present. What beauty, what purity. I had prepped a simple gift for Ashraf, Adil's son, which made a nice first impression on his wife, Siham, who welcomed me enthusiastically. She had prepared an awesome feast for me, which made me forget those days of hunger. And in the evening we sat in the living room watching television, which is an amazing invention, and I found him asking me to put on chic clothes because an important visitor was coming after a while. I did as he asked and put on my blue suit, but weirdly I found him staring at me with interest and his wife inspecting me from head to toe while I stood there confused like an idiot. Lighting a cigarette, he asked his wife, "Well, what do you think?" "The tie is not suitable. He looks homeless." "Ah, I can see what you mean," said Adel, who then went into his bedroom and returned with a more elegant tie and asked me to put it on. "Why?" I asked. "Just do as I say." So I did what he asked, not understanding what was happening. His wife started brushing the dust off of my blue suit and then stepped back to take a look at my overall appearance, like an artist putting his last touches on a painting just finished. And she said, "Okay, now raise your head and don't look down so much, like a beggar." "Okay," I said. "What exactly are they doing here?" And then the doorbell rang. Siham ran to the door and opened it, and I heard the sound of kisses and welcoming words. And then some girl entered and bent down to kiss little Ashraf, who jumped like a monkey, screaming, "Auntie Howeida! Auntie Howeida!" Adel's voice flipped to a sweet tone while introducing me to the girl and her to me, saying, "Dr. Rifat Ismail, Miss Howeida Abdelminam, my wife's sister." "Your wife's sister?" "And I'm the one who allowed you to prep me for this meeting, as if I'm a girl being prepared for a sacrifice at an atheist temple. Damn you two." And so I sat like a prisoner, depressed, in the corner of the room while the girl sat looking at the floor timidly with blushing cheeks, playing with a kid, whispering to him, and sitting him on her lap. I know this form of kindness which women excel in showing, or pretending to be. Pretending to forget everything in the world when they see a child. And Adel was speaking with enthusiasm, while Siham praised both me and her sister in such a tacky way. Of course, she doesn't know anything about me except what Adel had told her, and surely nothing encouraging to that extent. I felt like someone exposed in a slave market. And I don't know why, but I felt like the girl felt the same. Does she know? That could be it. Anyway, this torturous setting was prolonged, and I think I felt what one sitting in an electric chair feels exactly. The time had reached 10 p.m. when the girl stood up to leave, as she was late. I shook her hand, and she did likewise, and for the first time she lifted her eyes to me. And without courtesy, Adel said, "Unfortunately, my car is not running, so I won't be able to give you a lift, Hueda." Surprised, I said, "But you just took me to Stanley a couple of hours ago." He winked several times and smashed my foot with his shoe, which made me finally understand, so I told her, "I'll give you a lift, Hanat." "Hueda, her name is Hueda," Adel mumbled. Bursting with happiness with this scene of our meeting, our two wounded hearts, or at least that's what she thinks, Siham hurried to show us to the door. She stood there on the threshold of the stairs, waving as if seeing us off to our marriage home. She is finally at peace for us. After half an hour, I returned to Adel's. He met me eagerly and sat me down in the living room and asked, "Well, what do you think?" "About what?" I said. "What an idiot!" he exclaimed. "About Hueda, of course." Truthfully, I told him, "I don't know." "Did you not speak in the car?" he asked. "Not a single word," I said. "We stayed silent like fish all the way to her place." He started cursing my idiocy, ignorance, and impoliteness, and saying I had embarrassed him after all he had done for me, claiming that he and his wife had gifted me someone any reasonable adult man would want to marry. He then pulled the nice tie off of me, so I told him, "Listen, Adel, blue is a lovely color, and green is a lovely color, but they never go together. And that is me and your wife's sister." "Actually, they do, you fool," he said. "I have a sweater with both of those colors." "Well, then, it's very ugly," I replied shortly. "And also," he said, "who told you you're blue? You are red." "You are more ahmar than anything I've ever seen in my life. And now you're going to tell me that you didn't like her? How do you know it wasn't her that didn't like you?" While untying my shirt collar, I told him, "I never claimed that, and I never asked to put myself, or someone else, in any test. I swear to you I would be unable to recognize her among 4 girls her age, and I don't know if she is pretty or ugly." Shaking his finger in my face warningly, he said, "See, Ham and I will stop searching for your own good." "Well, that's what I want," I said. And here the phone rang, so he lifted it, started listening, and grunting his replies in short sentences, essentially conveying that this was unexpected and surprising, and that he was coming right away. He then put down the phone and stood for a moment, thinking about the content of the phone call he just received. And luckily, he forgot everything about getting me married. "An accident?" I asked. "No, it's a disaster." And he stood up and put on his suit jacket, asking me to come with because there was something he wanted to show me. He threw me the tie, asking me to put it back on, and told his wife that we were going out and may be late. We got into his car and drove through the streets of Alexandria as they started emptying of pedestrians at this hour. The rain had started falling heavily on the streets and the car's windshield. The headlights cut through the darkness of the streets, which grew even more empty and dirty, and the car's freedom of movement decreased. I don't know Alex well, but I know we were somewhere in Manshea. Adil was silent as the grave, smoking heavily, which heightened my sense of danger with the passing moments. And on a street corner I saw a strange scene as if from a colorized theater movie. An ambulance parked there with its rooftop lights spinning, sending balls of fiery light over the heads of those standing there, and drops of rain falling carelessly. 3 police cars parked, and next to one of them, an officer standing holding a police radio transmitter, speaking to someone, while other police officers stood bodily blocking the way. There were flashlights held by scores of people whose jobs I didn't know. Adil got out of the car and straightened his posture, and went through the line of officers, who freaked out upon seeing him and started saluting him in confusion. Adil had changed in seconds. He changed into the horrible leading character, standing stone-faced with firm features and totally forgetting my existence. I couldn't believe for a second that this fearful man was my old friend and the man with whom I was joking just half an hour ago. Following him through the heart of the crowd, I saw something covered with a blood-stained sheet, and heard a well-dressed young man standing next to it, aiming at it, saying, "At approximately 9 p.m., sir. Same circumstances." Same circumstances? What does he mean? Then I noticed 2 cops dragging a miserable-looking young man over to where we stood, and in a firm, militaristic way, one of them said, "This is a boy from the cafe, sir." Adil turned to him and asked roughly, "What was he wearing? Answer me." Shaking, and I don't blame him for a second, the cafe worker said, He was very skinny, sir. His skin was strangely yellow. He was wearing a black suit and had a briefcase with him, and he drank strong tea, then paid the bill and disappeared into the alley. And there was a wound on his cheek." Lighting up another cigarette, Adil said without looking at anyone, "Fingerprints?" A disembodied voice rose from the crowd, saying, "As usual, sir, he was wearing gloves." Then Adil gave some orders to the coroner's team and cut his way through the lines of cops leaving, while I ran after him like a scared chicken. And nervously, he opened his car door and reached over to the passenger's side lock to open for me. While relaxing into the passenger seat next to him, I said, "So, even Sir Adil is worried about his car in the midst of all this security and does not neglect to secure the locks?" He didn't comment or laugh. He simply turned on the wipers to clear the heavy raindrops, started the engine, and drove through the wet city streets. He was totally absent-minded, which pushed me to respect his silence. After a few seconds, with his eyes on the dark street, he told me, "What we have just seen is the 5th episode in a series of mysterious murders. I had implied such to you before. Every time the same thing happens. In a dark, forgotten alley, someone finds a beggar's corpse or a passerby totally mutilated with severed limbs, big pieces of the body missing, as if someone pulled them off patiently, exactly like the butcher does with his hung carcasses." Horrified, I said, "That's really awful." "And it's always the same story," he continued. "A skinny guy with a weird complexion, carrying a bag, seen minutes prior by someone near the crime scene, and then escaping directly afterwards. One of the witnesses said he gets into a blue car, but no one sees him after that." "And how is that related to the victims?" I asked. "Lighting his 10th cigarette in as many minutes," he said. "It's hard to make a connection between those bums, as they know nothing of gangsters or mafia men or microfilm thieves stealing Russian intelligence, if that's what you mean." "And is there a common time frame or a pattern to the crimes?" I asked. "Ah," he said, "you're talking about the Tuesday thief or the blonde serial killer or anything of that sort. There's always a fixed modus operandus which any self-respecting serial killer uses, except for this bastard. He kills anybody on any given day, at any spot, at any hour, even in broad daylight. Randomness is the base of his heinous work, which makes any plan to accost him basically irrelevant." "But what's the use of the media blackout?" I asked. "Publicizing what I just showed you will only make a public scare all over Alex, and that won't be useful to the next victims, because they are either beggars or homeless, which means they are far removed from the media effect from the news or radio and would know nothing. Do you know why I'm telling you this, Rifat?" Stupidly, I replied, "Friendship, of course." He burst into cruel, confident laughter and then said, "There's no friendship in work, my dear doctor. Don't you understand yet the meaning of what you have just seen and heard? You are the one who will lead me to this serial killer. And now, Rita, I think I have prolonged my description of this event, which is not really of importance to you. And if you want to take something from this long letter, 7 pages, please just comfort Mom for me and tell her I saw a potential bride who is not bad, but I'm hesitant. That's everything. As for why I told you this, it's because I was about to explode and needed to tell someone what I've seen. And as for what Adil told me afterwards, well, it's a secret that I can't divulge, even to you. Wish me good luck and write to me at my address in Cairo if you find time. Thanks, and goodbye. Your brother, Rifat." End of part 3. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more upcoming audiobooks.